Thank you. It's certainly exciting times at the moment, and you'll actually probably see there's a common theme starting to appear through this. And some of the presenters you saw in the earlier session, as a very early stage startup, we can definitely relate to some of those conversations across the farm table with farmers. So I run Ovass. Like I say, we don't have your traditional story in starting, but if you're in this particular industry, you'll start to see these numbers. Ethan had alluded to them earlier. He kind of said it in a different way, but it's kind of the whole, we've got to do more with less, and we've got less people to actually create the food. And actually, as a population, we're eating more food as it is. So keep that in mind for the rest of this presentation. But what is Ovass? So Ovass enables agri-biz owners, so growers, farmers, to basically make better decisions using live data, analytics from sensors, machinery, and more. And we call that our Sensor Enablement and Analysis Platform, or SEAP. And the best way to describe this is I'm actually going to give you an analogy from a different industry to kind of explain it and make it make sense for it. So this particular diagram here, oops, where is the computer? There we go. I'm having technical difficulties. We'll use that. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Is to kind of reference this. So this is Red Bull's latest car. And this particular car has over 100 strategically placed sensors which monitor over 10,000 different components, with the view that essentially the pit crew are looking at all these sensors, they're looking at the data they're getting from it, and they're basically able to optimize that car's performance every single lap, every single corner. They're looking at the engine rate, they're looking at the tires, they're making strategic kind of decisions based on it. Do they take the weather into consideration, at the fact that, you know, actually it's just rain, the tires, they can probably get a little bit more fuel in the car because the car works heavier. And so we kind of give this as a really good analogy. Now, if we took this, taking all these different sensors and applied it to, here we go, to the seasons, then how does that help the, me in presentations? Technology, you've got to love it, haven't you? Go on, get down to that slide. There we go, it's probably easier. Next one. So if we applied that then to each season, how does that help a farmer or a grower essentially take all these bits of data in? And essentially, data is one thing, but making it into context and making it into information is part of the journey. But then taking that information and giving it to the person who can actually make the decision on that data is actually the most important factor. And as a startup, that's kind of what we spent. We spent a lot of time in looking at talking to farmers, talking to agronomists, and talking to about their problems. And we even ran forums, and it was quite funny because the conversation the gentleman had earlier, if you speak to farmers, they can be slightly pessimistic at times. When we asked the open question, you know, what's the biggest problem hitting the dairy industry at the moment, one of them shouted out divorce. And I just kind of thought maybe I'm in the wrong industry at this point. So what we do is essentially we're taking all these different data points, and you mentioned 4D, that's essentially where we're going. We're building a 4D view for a farmer then to take actionable tasks. Do they put that extra bit of fertilizer on the ground? We blend that with this data coming out of the soil. We blend it with the drone and external weather station data. And this I'm going to talk to you a bit more in detail, unstructured data. We take that and we essentially structure it for a farmer so they can then take actionable tasks based on that. And so they can have real insights, essentially yes or no. Do I do this or don't I do this? I'm just going to stick to good old next button. So we started, we actually do subscribe to open data. So for the government people here, we actually came out of GovHack, which is an open data hackathon. And we actually took this concept and of a product around managing assets, and also around another hackathon that we won, which was about tracking children with devices. And over a pub drink one time, we were talking to a friend who had a farm. He said, actually, I'd like to take that device that you've created, and could I track my cows with it? So that kind of led us on. At this point, we weren't really thinking about being a startup. It was more of a project, and we kind of took it down that road. So we started to experiment with Zigbee. And we started to find some limitations with that technology. It wouldn't do what we wanted to do. We couldn't use triangulation to position where the cow is. It meant we had to have a GPS chip on it, which then reduced the battery life, et cetera, et cetera. So I was kind of a bit like Neo in the Matrix, looking for the answer, kind of said, there's got to be something out there, there's got to be something out there. And something led me, I actually then saw a little article about this new technology called LoRa. And somehow or another, I basically managed to wangle myself a conversation on the phone with a gentleman called Torsten Kramp from IBM, who's their head inventor. And he must have thought, who's this weirdo, this Britishman calling from Australia, wanting to learn about LoRa? And so what happened is this project started to gain ground. And we basically started to experiment a bit further with this new LoRa technology. We took the dip and we bought the kit. And the first prototype was a lot worse than this. I can best describe it. It looked like a bomb in a sandwich box. And when we were out in different fields, we thought we've got to put this in a better looking thing. Because we had police coming up to us saying, what are you doing? We had that there. And so we started to experiment with LoRa. And at this point, it's still a project. So we're still going on down this route. We're talking to farmers. And we start to get to the bottom of what the problems are. And we started to quickly decide that we're not hardware people. My background is in software. My co-founder is a software engineer and a data scientist. And we basically said, there is no point in us going down this route and spending vast amounts of money in producing hardware tech. So at that point, we kind of took the strategical decision after having gone down the route of having a product actually designed and the board looked at, and talking to Chinese manufacturers, and we said, look, we need somebody locally that we can trust and we can partner with. And that's kind of what led us into talking to Simon and the great team at LX, who you're going to hear from next, and saying, actually, can we take your sensors, and because we're interested in the data, can we take your sensors and can we essentially bring that together and understand this dream of essentially bringing all that data into one place. And as we said, when we were talking to the farmers, you talk to them about technology and they kind of go a bit fuzzy-eyed and they start to roll over, and all the things that the gentleman from who spoke earlier before the break are all true. Yeah, there is this whole essential, where's the bottom line for me? Where's the value add? And if you go to talk to them and say, well, but it's going to be cool and it's going to give you this little dashboard, it means nothing. And so we learned very quickly you've got to translate that into this actually means, potentially you don't have to put sort of 15, 20 grand's worth of fertilizer on your particular plant because you're actually getting insight to what you're doing. And the other problem that we found very, very quickly was that farmers are not, ag tech is not a new thing. Farmers have been doing technology. They're they're innovators. They've been doing it for a long, long time. But what they do have is they have a lot of unstructured data. And I remember sat at the farm table and farmer came up and he literally slapped down a big, long pile of arch lever files. And he said, how are you going to digitize this? How can you make use of it? And that kind of led us down a route which we essentially, we said, right, well, that's the first problem we've got to solve for the farmer is how do we make sense of that data? And then we kind of lifted into the whole data sovereignty question, which is who owns that data? And and as farmers said, well, you can't own the data because all you'll do is you'll sell it to someone who will then use it against me. And so the whole question of open data and how that is to be used is a question that definitely we have to answer quite quickly. We're Ovass, given that we came out of GovHack and open data, and now we very much subscribe to open data. But what we did is we essentially created a system that allows them to take that data and structure it very quickly. So they've got their KML files, their soil moisture tables. It basically runs them through really easy wizards. We've all done it, and we essentially said, right, we'll create a way for you to bring that data into one place, map your farm, right, you've got your bedrock. Then we can now look at sensors and we can start to get a real-time view because we've got the live data coming in, and we've also got some of the historical data. And what we have found is that the really old historical data actually, while it's worth something, it's not worth as much as it should do because of climate change and the way that the world's actually changed in the last sort of 2 decades. So we went on it, and just to quote, there was a couple of words missing in between there, which are a bit blue, but it was essentially, just make it simple. Yeah, just make it really, really easy for me to essentially get my data in and use it. Make it easy for my agronomists to understand it. Make sure my partners can understand it. And that's essentially what we've done. We've taken that. This is our first version. We've brought it in, and we've essentially created the bedrock now for a farmer to bring their data in and have a good base bedrock to work from. The next stage is, as you see here, we've got this whole tab here for applications, which is we're going to look at different use cases, so we can then take that particular data and then write specific solutions to the problems they're having, because that's kind of I think that's the real value chain for the value proposition for the farmer, is getting down to that small bit. As I just makes it really easy, makes them able to bring in their data points. We've learned very quickly through speaking to the farmers that essentially a data point can be transient. So if they want to take a sensor from paddock A and move it to paddock B, don't make it hard. So we've built it in such a way that essentially as soon as they lift that sensor, if it's in a new GPS coordinates that fit within a polygon or a section, it starts recording the data against that particular area. So, there was just a little bit of common sense behind it. And another thing, this is where you're starting to see the common themes coming through here. So I mentioned about who owns the data. So I mentioned about two projects earlier. One was the tracking the kid, and one was about the structure of assets. So the whole core of our platform is the ability to manage assets. So the ability to say a plant is an asset, but then that's got a relationship with a sensor. That sensor then may be part of multiple sensors in a paddock. That's a group. That's part of a container. The paddocks then part of a field, and you can start to go on and upwards from there. It aggregates that data. So as an example being here, if for example you're part of a growers group, you can see the whole line all the way down through to the actual sensor right in the ground, or bring it right the way up and start to aggregate that data. But one thing we did find was that who owns the data? So this kept coming up in every single conversation we had. And so we basically came up with a concept. Why can't the farmer benefit from sharing their data? Why can't they benchmark their data against other particular farmers? And so you'll see it. There's the gentleman before the break mentioned they were looking at it the same. We have a concept called communities. So that one community can aggregate their data up anonymously or in their own reel, so they can benchmark themselves against their neighbour or their farm or their group. And then the other real thing that really is we're getting quite a big turn on from a lot of farmers is that we can then supply that data anonymously up to, for example, banks and insurance companies and that, where the farmer can actually lease that data to those organisations and they'll get paid for leasing that data. And that's, we call it data leasing, and essentially that's through our API, or they can do it through logging on. So, like I say, we've been going since October last year. We are we are the new kids on the block. And they say we are seeking current opportunities to do different pilots and to look at different partnerships. We are also seeking investment. So if you're interested, come and have a chat with me after the show. Thank you.